Good morning, everybody. I'm Cameron Allison. I'm the manager of film and lecture programs here at the NCMA. And I just want to thank all of you for coming out to support what we have going on, especially this wonderful Seeing Red exhibition and my favorite product of NASA, actual Perry art. That's literally all I've got. Perry, you want to come up now?
Thank you very much, Cameron. I appreciate that very much. Thanks everybody for coming out on a beautiful fall day. It's really nice to be with you here today. We're going to launch right into the talk. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes. If someone wants to flag me about 40 minutes from now, and I would just to remind me to allow time for questions and things like that. And then after the lecture's over, after the questions are over, I'm going to go over into the West Building, into the Conservation Gallery, where the Red Exhibition is. If you want to come over there and you have more questions, that sort of thing. So, you sharp people who are paying really close attention to the description of this presentation might wonder what's happening the first few minutes of this. Because the talk evolved, okay? So don't worry though, the connection between red and passion and eroticism is still in there. It's just a little late in the presentation, okay? So here we go. So the inspiration for today's talk, well, the Seeing Red exhibition is the inspiration for the talk, but we went looking for a lot of artist quotes about red, and Klaus Oldenburg had the winner as far as I'm concerned. And his exact quote is, "My mother warned me to avoid things colored red." So if you're familiar with Klaus Oldenburg's work, and here's 4 examples that I pulled, his shtick, his thing, was to take a small everyday object and then blow it up into incredible size. And a lot of times the result is these things can get kind of ominous looking. And when he injects red into it, as far as I'm concerned, it starts looking a little dangerous. So that's sort of the takeoff for today. And so here's some great examples. I particularly, his iconic piece is the typewriter eraser. It's about, I don't know, 15 feet tall, something like that. But I got to say, the knife ship in the Venice canals is my favorite, since I've seen that. So in contemplating this quote, this painting came to mind. So this painting is not on view right now. It will be on view in a few months, but it was on view. Is it? It's still on view. I'm sorry, it's still on view because it's in the exactly in the Performing Arts temporary exhibition, and that's coming down in a couple of months. But this painting will go back up later after that. That's why I was confused. But this painting is a really interesting case. We acquired the painting in 2016, and when it came in the door, the dress was blue. And like all the artwork that we acquire, we look at it very closely, and especially something that's old, we look for changes because changes happen. Artwork gets old, it gets dirty, it gets damaged, and restorations happen. And then every once in a while, something extra special happens that's odd. And conservation, and particularly art history, a lot of what we do is solve mysteries, solve puzzles. We wonder, how did it get this way? Why did it get this way? Because sometimes it has real art history implications, and it tells us something about the artist or the culture it was made in, that sort of thing. So we all kind of sat around and wondered why someone changed the color of this dress. And the actual color of the dress is red. This is the way it appears now. And as far as we could tell, this is about a 400-year-old painting. Roughly 200 years ago, someone decided it needed to be blue. Who knows why? Every once in a while, we see a portrait with a hairstyle changed because fashion changes, hairstyles change, and someone will update their relative's portrait by giving them a different hairstyle, things like that. But in this case, this was kind of whole hog. You know, we don't see this very often. So why? So one of the comments that frequently came up was this: someone just wanted to match their couch. Okay, and I have a problem with this. I know this stuff happens. Interior design is important. We all have things that we like, and we want to compound by making it even more so. But I just never agreed with this. I just think, why do you take an old master painting of quality and do something so significant to it? Match your couch, okay, I guess it's possible. But I really don't think that's the issue. I think someone had an issue with red. All the things that I've looked at with the Seeing Red exhibition kind of just continues to make me feel this way, that red symbolized something to the owner of this painting, and they wanted to change it. So, thus the inspiration for today's talk. I've been reading a lot of murder mysteries recently, so we're going to go Agatha Christie on this painting and try to figure out why someone would do this. Okay, so I'm going to tell you right up front, we don't know why they did it. So you're going to help us today by voting at the end of this why you think this happened. And we're essentially going to make it a murder mystery. So the victim was the painting, and the suspects are the symbolisms of red. Okay, so we handed out some tour guides earlier, just before, and these candidates, these suspects, come from the tour guide that you're seeing there. Now, I want to say up front, these are cultural symbols that we associate red with. Cultural symbols change all the time. They change from one generation to another, from one continent to another, from one culture to another. One symbol doesn't mean the same thing to everybody, okay? So this is a 400-year-old painting. Red probably meant something a little bit different than it does to us today, even among Western cultures where this comes from. But still, this is just an exercise. So we're going to interrogate each one of our suspects: danger, power, and authority, love, and evil. And at the end, you guys are all going to judge who the most likely suspect is. Danger. Okay. This goes way, way back in human evolution as far as I'm concerned. So we evolved to see color very, very well. Why? Because it was important to our survival. All colors. But red in particular is special in some way. We can theorize that red is not very common in the natural world. You do see red, but generally speaking, when you see red, it means something. And sometimes it means danger. So I think that we have evolved to see red and immediately feel a sense of caution. On your drive here, you all saw red many, many, many times, especially if you're paying attention, the stop signs, the lights on the back of the cars, brake signals. They're all red for a reason. And we've incorporated that into our history. So we go way, way back. We have natural phenomenon like volcanoes, we have fire, and we have some plants and animals and things are poisonous that are red, and these are all caution signs. Of course, we have things that are red that are not dangerous, like ripe apples and things like that. But still, red is a signal in nature to pay attention. Red flowers, why are they red? To attract insects, so the flowers can reproduce, things like that. So color is a signal to all of living things, but particularly humans have really keyed in on red. And if you're leaking a certain red substance, then the alarm bells should be going off in your head, right? So and I have to say, a lot of red symbolism comes back to blood. If you really think about it long enough, that's where a lot of it comes from. So if we look at the painting and we see what happened to the painting, how does this fit? Does danger fit this situation? Does this woman in red look dangerous? Anybody? Yes, I heard a yes. No, okay. A bloody red, there you go. Muddy red, yeah, it is. And actually, I have to say, the painting looks better in person than it does in this slide. But we're going to reserve our thoughts about whether it's dangerous or not on some level. And to not a spoiler alert, a combination of these suspects could be the story, not necessarily one or the other. Our second suspect is power, authority, and parentheses, affluence. So red, as we already know, signified importance. It got our attention. And sometimes it's dangerous, and sometimes it's food, and sometimes it's something else that's important to our survival. And along the way, red became a sign of power and authority and ultimately affluence. So we have three really good examples in the exhibition. And yes, we talked about the volcano. So these are three good examples in our collection that are part of the tour. And the head of a god or priest from Cypriot, well over 2,000 years old. And the red pigment still exists on this sculpture. You might not be able to see it in the image here quite so much, but if you see it in the galleries, you can see the red is still in the eyes and the hair and the beard, that sort of thing. And red would be just a natural pigment for people to paint their gods, their representations of powerful people, because red's important. Like we already said, there's a sense of danger, there's a sense of importance that would draw attention to this depiction of a god and make it more lifelike. When we get to the king of Spain, third and fourth, these were powerful people. And when we look at these portraits, there are all sorts of cultural signs that the artist has incorporated to tell us that these are really important people. And if we look at these, sure, there's a crown and there's a scepter, symbols of power. They're dressed in armor, and I'm pretty certain these men never actually saw combat, but they're dressed in armor because that gives you a sense of power. But all that red fabric, why is that there? Well, that red fabric is there because red fabric, essentially through all of time, has been the most expensive fabric. This changed in the 20th century because modern chemistry and industrial revolution it makes it very easy for us to make anything any color. So our thoughts about this have kind of disappeared because for generations we haven't really thought about it. But previous to the 19th century, red fabric was it. It was the most expensive, almost without exception. And so if you saw somebody in public 400 years ago and they were swathed in red, they were rich, they were affluent. And if you that in a context like this with other things around it, then the importance, the authority of that person is even more obvious. So we look at this painting at the bottom here by Morello, and it's a Blessed Giles before Pope Gregory the Ninth, and the Pope is seated to the left there. So why are these three men dressed in red? Well, they're cardinals. They're cardinals of the Catholic Church, and in the 1400s, the Catholic Church officially changed the color of cardinal robes to red. Now, of course, they say this is a symbol in honor of the blood of Jesus, and of course, that's true. But the fact is, red had been a sign of authority long before Christianity. In the Egyptian world, in the Asian world, red has been a sign of authority for a very long time, once again, because red cloth is expensive. So, is that the suspect here? Is that why this portrait was changed? Was she too affluent? Was she too powerful looking in red? Okay, let's move on. Love, passion, and eroticism. So our example in the collection is Venus rising from the waves. And what does Venus look like here? How is she typically depicted? Okay. In this image, of course, she's fleshy and round because that was kind of the Baroque way of painting women, especially during that time. But she's partially clothed and she is presenting herself as an image of love, particularly erotic love, but that's a little subdued, of course. And Venus is the god of love, goddess of love. So that's what's going on here. And you can also see in this painting itself, there's a lot of red going on. There's red roses, there's other things like that. And if you think about it in our culture, red often represents love, hearts at Valentine's, red roses, things like that. So red is often associated with love, even today in many different ways. But there's a reason for that, at least as far as I'm concerned. My theory is that in large part, this is because of our blush response, okay? If you are embarrassed, particularly if you're put on the spot, and I felt this frequently, I still do when I meet a pretty woman and I'm talking to that person, I might blush, you know? So it's just a natural response. Sometimes when we get angry, we blush. And what is blushing? It's more blood going to your skin. That's why you look more red, okay? So there's this close association between love and physical love and that sort of thing. Because we blush, we turn red when these events happen. And so it's a very natural thing to make that a symbol of love. Now, of course, this gets stretched when we go into other areas where it's not so much about love, but it's more about the eroticism, right? So prostitution being one of those things. So we recently acquired this fantastic painting by Kees van Dongen. And Van Dongen was famous for using prostitutes as his models. It was a part of the culture that he felt comfortable in. And this is not a rare thing. Many artists in the 18th and 19th century, the Impressionists, people like that, found comfort in those milieus because these were fringy things. They were avant-garde things, and they felt very comfortable with it. But how does Keith Van Dongen portray this woman in a sea of red? And so, of course, our mind goes to the red light district. Why is an area of prostitution called a red light district? This association with love and eroticism. It has to be that. So if we look at our suspect, once again, is this woman, is there too much love happening here? Does she represent a prostitute is the question. Is that why this was changed? Okay, our next and last suspect, evil, sin. Okay. So the artwork that's in your tour that represents evil is this ancient pot from Egypt. Now, this ancient pot is actually the oldest thing in our collection, and it's one of my favorite things in the collection because it's incredibly simple. It's really was a common thing in ancient Egypt, this red and black ware. But in terms of art history and in terms of the way we see this in ancient Egyptian culture, is it really represents kind of the yin and yang of Egyptian culture. So half of this pot kind of represents the good things in life, and the other half, the bad things in life. So in which half is the good thing in this? And docents can't answer this. Will anybody care to answer? What is the good side of the yin and yang of this pot as far as ancient Egyptian symbolism goes? It's obvious. You know what the answer is. No, the bottom half is red. Okay, so the upper half is black. And black is good in ancient Egyptian culture. Why? Because the Nile floods every year, spreads that fertile black soil all over the valley. The plants grow like crazy. And that's really the food that the ancient Egyptians grew was the seat of their power and their the longevity of their culture was because it was such a fertile area. But beyond the black soil was the red desert. The red desert didn't support life. It was a place, if you were stuck out there, you probably died because there's no resources out there. So the red desert was a scary place. So who do you think how do you think they viewed the god of the desert? Probably not very favorably. That was the god that you didn't want to be associated with. And that god was Set. And he was the god of chaos, storms, violence, and the desert. And he's often called the red god. So you can see very quickly that the ancient Egyptians had some caution about red. So much so that when they said the word red, the word for in ancient Egypt is desher. And desher is the root of many other words in the Egyptian language, something like evil. And and the euphemism to do evil things in ancient Egyptian is to do red things. They would go so far that when they were doing their hieroglyphs and writing out words, which are picture language, correct? Red ink would be used for the names of evil gods like Seth, evil animals. And once again, the word evil would be written in red. So you can see this goes way, way, way back, long before our Christian association with the devil, El Diablo. And I won't go into details about the devil because I believe most of you understand who the devil is. But the Scarlet Letter is a great example of how this moves forward in our culture. So you all probably know the Scarlet Letter. It's a book by Hawthorne, and it's in early Puritan culture in New England. And this woman has been marked as an adulterer. She had a baby out of wedlock, and she's forced to wear an A. But what color is the A? It's red. And so I looked it up today, and one interpretation of this today that I read anyway was that red represents the stain of sin on her, and it's a visible stain of sin. She's meant to be shamed by this. I love that arm sticking out, pointing at the A. And once again, we're talking about the red light district, the seamy side of the our sexual nature, which we associate with red, especially in prostitution and adultery, that sort of thing. So What are your thoughts? Why was our portrait changed? Is this woman a sinful woman? Is that why she was represented this way? That is the question. You think so? Okay. Okay. Well, we're going to put it to a vote. Here's our vote. Okay. So we're going to show a show of hands, and you can vote for more than one, because like I said, this could be a combination of suspects. They could have been a team that victimized the painting. So number one, danger. How many of you think danger was the reason, the suspect? Okay, not many of you. Power and authority. Couple of those, couple of those. Love, was love. Okay, yes, a strong vote for love, yes. And evil. Okay, evil and love go hand in hand. But then interior design, we have to vote for that as well. Okay, that's almost equal. Okay, so it's kind of a toss up. It could be all three. We don't know. So that resolves our mystery. We pretty certain who did it, or a team of who did it. But we can go on, and we'll talk a little bit more about this painting in just a minute. But Seeing Red, I just want to remind you, the exhibition's in the other building. The exhibition runs through December of 25, so it's going to be up for quite some time. And there are signs that it might be up for even a year beyond that. And I will direct you to the NCMA Learn website. That is, the education department here has their own separate website, and they have a virtual exhibition of Seeing Red. Well, almost all that information and much more from the exhibition is online, and that is an evergreen exhibition. It will always be there as long as we have power and internet access at the North Carolina Museum of Art. So I welcome you to visit that. But let's go back to the paintings for just a minute. And before I started doing this walk down the mystery lane and read symbolism, I cornered the curator, Michelle Frederick, and I wanted to get her interpretation of this painting and her idea about why it looked the way it did. So there's several things that she brought up. So let's remember that this is a 17th century Flemish painting, and the artwork at that time, there were many artists. It was associated with the Dutch Golden Age. There was, Flanders and Netherlands were right next to each other, and it was a very active period with a lot of artists, and it's very highly appreciated. Yes.
I wouldn't think people weren't wearing a lot of light colors, because, they're doing more manual labor. They want stuff that's not going to show the dirt. I'm also thinking of all the Dutch paintings I've seen where people are wearing black. So
there's
blends better.
Right. From my view, there's two things going on there. And yes, this is question and answer period, if anybody else wants to comment. Yeah, no, you're fine. I appreciate you speaking up. Two things going on there. One is that yes, all through time, especially back then, there's a sizable part of the population that are not wearing expensive clothes because they're laboring. They're doing things where they have to wear proper clothes that don't get in the way and serve a purpose and all that sort of thing. But generally speaking, the more affluent people are doing exactly the opposite. They're showing off their affluence by wearing clothes that aren't practical. You think about early English dress, actually dress about this time, they're wearing dresses like this. Things like that. And it's a show of affluence to wear impractical clothes. So this woman, if you look closely, she's got fur trim. She's wearing expensive jewelry. And one of the things that you could say about this painting that's quite common at the time is musical instruments, a book, documents on the table. This is suggesting that this person is educated, and that's a small part of society doing that. Yes.
Project more when you have the same color money. It's sort of hidden as part of the dress.
That's a very interesting comment, because one of the things I've presented in previous red presentations is this phenomenon that we refer to as chromostereopsis. Everybody heard of chromostereopsis? No, of course you haven't. It's somewhat akin to complementary colors. It's not the same thing, but some people are more sensitive to it than others, as I've found out. But essentially, it means that if you see a bunch of colors represented as just flat surfaces, all in a line, all at equal distance from you, If one of them's red, it actually looks like it's closer to you. Some people are much more sensitive than others. And I think it's one of the explanations why our ancient ancestors put more emphasis on red as being powerful and godlike, because it seemed to have some specialness to it, the way we perceived it. So it's interesting that you say that, because if that's true, the red would in this painting would project out more. It would look more prominent to you. And the blue pushes it back a little bit, makes the lute more dominant in the image. So that's an interesting observation. It does. Yeah, it does have the pattern, which we were very happy to see, because it just complements even more that this is a valuable fabric that this woman is wearing. So let me tell you what Michelle Frederick had to say. So one thing is, a common thing for painters at the time, because there's a lot of competition, is they're showing off their skills. Rembrandt was great about this. Many of these painters of this era were famous for this, where they're painting just to show off. So this dramatic lighting effect, that's not easy to pull off. Her pose, where she's putting her head back, the anatomical correctness of that is hard to pull off. And the various different surfaces, the fur, the candlestick, the book, all these different surfaces and textures take skill to render well. So that's one of the things that's happening here. Another thing is that this is a genre painting. Genre paintings have become very popular at the time. And basically a genre painting is just showing people doing everyday things. And there's a lot of variety in that. You can show somebody doing labor, washing clothes, whatever, but playing music, reading, all sorts of genre things that are subjects worth mining if you're trying to sell your artwork and you want to vary from somebody else's output. Another thing that could be happening here is what we call a vanitas. A vanitas painting artwork is a reminder that we're all here temporarily. And so oftentimes it's very straightforward in Dutch and Flemish painting. There's a skull sitting on the table to remind us that we're not here forever. And so be mindful and do good things, that sort of thing. The candle is oftentimes a symbol of our lifespan. And another thing that's very interesting, that I don't know that we represent this well in our collection, maybe you guys can correct me, but at this time, many of the painters, one of the things that they would do that was very popular was they would do a series, a group of paintings, 4, 5, 6 paintings that were allegories about something in particular. So one of those would be the senses. You'd have hearing, you'd have taste, you'd have smell, you'd have an allegory about each one of those in a separate painting. So this could be an allegory about sound, that hearing, that sort of thing. And it could also be an allegory of music just itself, that in that respect. But last but not least, kind of putting that all together, and something else that's very important for Flemish culture, Michelle kind of felt strongly that the person who put blue on this painting may have had a lot of different motivations, but one of them might have been to make this painting more Catholic. So why do you say that? Red has been associated with the Virgin Mary for a very long time, but even more so in the last few hundred years, it's blue. It's this royal deep blue. And there's a very good reason for that in my mind, because one of the few things that has ever rivaled red pigments and red dyes for their value on the market is ultramarine blue. Ultramarine blue was introduced from Asia into Europe about 1300. Very quickly became the favored blue by artists depicting the Virgin Mary, because it was incredibly valuable. For a short time, 100 years or so, ultramarine blue was the most expensive pigment you could buy, more valuable than gold. And so how do you, if you make a religious, like an altarpiece, like our Giotto painting or something like that, how do you honor the saints and Jesus and Mary? You put them in the most expensive materials, the most expensive looking clothes, things like that. And so that's one reason why it's there. Yeah.
This is blue, but also at the top of the lute, there's a really red blush that's not there in the other one. And I'm wondering what could be any possible investigations behind it.
Sure. So there is an explanation for that, but it gets us off the track. So let me finish my thought on the Catholic thing, but remind me, because it's an interesting observation. So to finish the Catholic thought was that if you look at this figure, she's wearing a very small cross on her chest. Okay. So it's unlikely a prostitute would be wearing a cross on her chest. I mean, it's possible. There are plenty of Christian prostitutes, I'm sure. But the other thing is she's throwing her head back and looking up at heaven. And that's a prayerful gesture. So if you're adding things up, it starts looking a little bit more religious and it's in that theme. So adding blue to it would make it a little bit more religious, a little bit more Catholic. So that's kind of rounds out Michelle's thinking on the possibility of why this is blue.
Well, I wonder too if there's skepticism because when she's in the red, even though she's looking heavenward, there's a static look on her face.
Mhm.
That makes it kind of question like,
It could be. I just always see her as,
blues.
yeah. I always see her as an entertainer. That was my first thought but when she's wearing such fine clothes, such expensive clothes, your basic tavern entertainer isn't dressed like that in any other painting from the era. So this is a person of means, has something behind her as far as family and money and all that sort of thing. And one of the other things that Michelle didn't say that I know is true, especially around this time, women were being trained in the finer things in life. It sounds very condescending, but essentially they were being given skills to make them more appealing as a mate, as a spouse. So someone who could paint was becoming a thing at this time. That was a very new thing. But playing music, reading, writing poetry, all that sort of thing rounded out the woman to make them more appealing in that sense. But let's get back to the gentleman's question about the end of the lute there. So this painting has a little bit more history that really isn't pertinent today, but I'll tell you about it anyway. So this painting is painted on top of an earlier painting. And as far as we can tell, the earlier painting is just a fragment of a much larger painting. But one of the things, and I don't have a conditioned photograph here that's really going to show you this, but across the top and down the right side is a border about 4 inches long, painted in. So what is that? It could be a trompe-l'oeil effect. So oftentimes when someone's making a painting of this era and they're doing like a figure study in an architectural setting or a mural or anything like that, they will put in architectural features to make it even more realistic, as if it's part of the wall. So that stripe around the outside on 2 sides, that could be some kind of a trompe-l'oeil window for showing a scene that's within this. So what's within this? We don't see much underneath of this that's recognizable. But the one thing that we see is a female figure that appears to be nude. And she's actually upside down in the orientation of this painting. So it was not a part of this painting, a part of this composition that was painted out. It's a totally different composition. It doesn't make any connection with this one. But that's why the end of the lute, the part up at the top there, looks odd, because everything around that edge looks a little odd. If you go look at the painting today, and you pay attention to the top part and the right edge, you will see it looks odd because the newer paint, the paint of this image, is not thick enough to cover up the old image. And so the end of the lute there looks very odd and worn. And I think the same person that painted the dress blue about 200 years ago strengthened the end of the lute. They put their own paint on there to make the end of the lute more strong looking. And that's why it looks the way in this image. Yes.
Her left sleeve is also been touched up quite a bit.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are quite a few small changes on it. And the other thing is it was dirty varnish, that sort of thing. So there was a lot of change when we cleaned the painting. And when we clean the painting, that's just a euphemism for taking off any material that's not original. So we're trying to get back as far as possible to the original surface so we can show you what the artist intended you to see. And in some cases, restoration is permanent. We can't take it off without damaging the artwork. So then we have to compensate for that. But in this case, the blue came off very easily because it's a relatively recent addition to the painting. And yes.
Maybe whoever added the blue paint did so because there was a concern about the red sending mixed messages. So yes, she's wearing a cross, but the cross is pointing to her chest. The shape of the lute mimics a woman's body. Maybe it's just the red is a little too sexy. And there's a desire to, yes, make her look more, I don't know about Catholic, but certainly religious, to add the blue as a symbol of purity, to get rid of any of that association that would invite us to see her as, well, music, if music be the food of love, sing on.
No, I think it's a great explanation. It kind of puts it all together. And when you're saying that, it reminds me, I'm roughly throwing out 200 years ago that this happened. When you start thinking about it in terms of history, you start thinking about the Victorian era, where people are much more picky about their images and how they want things represented. So they don't have any compunction to go back and change things like this. Yes, another question? Anybody?
I had just been curious about when the blue was done.
Right. We don't.
Restoration, could you tell the age of?
Only roughly. There were no indicators, no analysis that we could do that would really say exactly when it was done. Sometimes we're looking for other evidence. Like I'm working on a group of paintings now that are about the same age, but this group of paintings were all framed at the same time, and the labels for the framer are on the back of the painting, and we can date that label to roughly 1839 or 1829. I can't remember at the moment. But those labels say framer, glazer, restorer, yada, yada, yada. So we can kind of picture that all that was happening at the same time. They got framed and they got restored. So we're looking for other evidence like that. No other evidence is on this painting. So what we come down to is similar to the way archaeologists think. So anybody here does archaeology, you just don't dig a hole and see what's in it. You go down very slowly, level by level, and any evidence that you find in a certain level, that's the context. Everything else in that layer can help you figure out when that occurred. So we do the same thing with artworks like paintings. When we clean it, we just don't take it all off. We go down layer by layer. We take off the most recent things first, and we work our way down. And so a painting that's 400 years old, we commonly find 2, 3, 4 layers of dirt, varnish, restoration, dirt, varnish, restoration. And so we work our way down. And no one ticks off a calendar, but most artworks in our culture, in a museum like this, in the open market of this quality, of this type, gets restored once about every 400 years. It just happens when the artwork changes hands, it's inherited, it's sold. Someone wants to make it look better, so they restore it. And so just judging from these layers, we get the rough idea that roughly 200 years ago, these changes happen. Yes?
Anybody in the research to try to see, if this painting was originally in the home of a family and this could have been, a woman in the family? Do we have any information on who has owned this in the last 400 years? How did it come into your collection?
Right. We're talking about provenance is the word for that. And we try to do that to the nth degree. Unfortunately, this painting doesn't allow us to really make those connections. The path that is taken to get to us erased much of that history. An artwork like this, we're actually practically every artwork in our museum that predates 1945, we have to be very, very serious about where it came from, especially European artworks, because they can be Nazi loot. They could be things that were stolen during that time period and eventually hit the market. And we have at least 4 or 5 paintings and artworks that actually happened with. And so we need to be very certain about where these artworks come from. In this case, people were relatively confident. The research showed that we were relatively confident that this was not stolen. It was properly changed hands, but we don't know the full story of the history of this painting. Anyone else?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Thank you very much. We hit the questions early anyway, so yes.
Tell that the artist didn't, after he painted it a while, decided he just wanted to change it himself.
Once again, we're talking about layers. So you get used to seeing this sort of thing. So below this red was varnish or dirt or that sort of thing. I didn't personally restore this painting, and unfortunately, the conservator's not with us anymore. And so I'm going by her observations in the time that she felt that's how this the timing of this. once again, it's like if this is paint on top of paint, that's one thing. And oftentimes we do see artist changes, and we absolutely want to understand that in the moment because we don't want to accidentally take off something that's supposed to be there. So artist changes are absolutely a thing. But generally speaking, a year, 2 years, 5 years, you're really starting to get farther out from that being a possibility. And so you don't have time for dust and grime to really collect on that surface. You certainly don't have time for varnish and dirt and then more paint. That's not going to happen and be original to the artist. Very rare exceptions, but generally not. So, yeah.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I have a question. Are those symbols like the lute, the candle, the pergamene, are they related to any saint?
I'm sorry, could you say it a little louder?
If the lute, the candle, the pergamene are related to any saint, symbolism?
Yes, they very well could be. So I was saying like, and I don't know the symbolism well enough to really dissect this painting to that degree. So that's why I was relating what the curator was feeling about it. So the candle is a very typical sample or symbol for life or the shortness of life. And so that's definitely a part of this painting, particularly in the culture of the time it was made. That's the way it would have been seen, more likely than not. But at the same time, it gives the artist the opportunity to represent this dramatic lighting. So which one is it? Is it a vanitas? Is it about our short life, or is it about the artist showing off? It could be both, but we don't really know for a fact. Yeah.
Well, maybe the blue turns her into Saint Cecilia.
Sure. That's a good link. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
On your wall label, when this is rehung, will you show the painting with her in a blue dress?
We have. I'm not certain if it's on the label now. It has in the past, but I'm not certain about right now if it is.
Something about the importance of the conservation work.
Absolutely. I think so. Thank you very much. I think it's very important. I will say though that wall labels, it's a very small surface and a very few words to get across ideas. And eventually you just can't say it all. And so I'll give the curators a break that they're not showing off our conservation skills by talking about this. But in the very back, I think there was a question.
If this is supposed to be a saint or holy figure or Mary, do the Dutch not portray with a halo, kind of like Raphael or sort of that kind of like romantic or Renaissance period did?
I'm not certain. To my mind, and I'm not a specialist in that particular thing. In my mind, that was sort of rare at this time in this culture. And of course, the Netherlands and the Flanders were right next to each other. And at this time, and had been for about 100 years or so, there was a lot of conflict between Protestants and Catholics. And so this is a Flemish painter, so we would expect this to be a little bit more Catholic, but not necessarily, because at the same time, all of these artists were competing to do what? Make money. So of course they wanted to produce good art, they wanted to be known for producing good art, but they're also selling things. And so if you make a painting, and this is my own theory, if you make a painting and you are representing a saint, if you put a halo on that saint, that's a very Catholic painting. You just cut out half of the people that could be buying your artwork. So maybe you don't want to go quite that far. In Spain's incredibly Catholic at this time. So sure, yeah, you don't have to worry about your market for your artworks, and you can put that halo on there and make them as religious looking as you want. But that might explain that. So
But there's a veil, right? Like covering the hair, right?
it's a veil, but it's lace, and there's a lot of headwear at this time. But you can interpret it that way, certainly. So yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, sure. Question, have I worn you out? We can adjourn and go over to the exhibition in a few minutes if you care to. Yes.
What's the dye or what are the dyes that are used to make textiles red? And so.
Okay.
That's why the red textiles.
Absolutely. Have you been to the red exhibition? That was a very good question. It's a very good question. So yes, the short answer is yes. And that's what made them so expensive, because really strong red dyes that have some staying power are quite rare and expensive to acquire. So, but there were a number of different reds at this time, and I could talk for another hour about that, but I'll briefly tell you about a few of them. So, has anybody ever heard of shellac? Shellac, okay, that is actually running the word together because it's actually referred to as shell lac. And lac is an insect. And the insect builds cocoons basically for laying its eggs. And those cocoons are what you make shellac out of. It's a resin, but you actually have to work hard to get the red out of it. If you want to make clear shellac, you have to work hard to get the red out of it. It's naturally red. So the red in that shellac is a dye that was commonly used back then. It's an okay dye. It's not a great dye. It's an okay dye. And it fades. Like all organic things that come from life, living things, dyes tend to fade. And it was okay. Another one was Brazil wood. Brazil wood's represented in the exhibition. Brazil wood, where does Brazil wood come from? Anybody?
Venezuela?
It doesn't come from South America at all. It comes from Indonesia, Southeast Asia. And it was long known as Brazil wood before colonization of South America. But once they got there, once the Westerners got there, Europeans got there, they're looking for things to exploit. And one of the things they found in Brazil was trees that have red wood, just like the Brazil wood from Indonesia. So that's where the name comes from. So once again, that's a really good dye. It's probably in some of our artworks. But it was a cheaper dye because it didn't last as well. It faded rather dramatically. So when we're talking about European reds, previous to this, because this gets into the era where we're exploiting cochineal from Central and South America, that kind of changes everything. But previous to this, when we're going back to the Catholic Church and the cardinals' red robes, they were initially dyed with kermes. And kermes is an insect that was common to the Mediterranean area of Europe, and it was rare and expensive. It's an insect. It's seasonal. You can only get it at certain times, and it's labor intensive because you have to get people to go out and pick them off of trees, and then you dry them, and all that kind of stuff. And it was the most expensive, valuable red dye going all the way back through ancient Roman and Egyptian times and things like that. And it was always the preferred red. It's a very strong red. It's a very good dye, and it's relatively light fast compared to everything else. And so the one story I can tell you very quickly to add on to that is that, and this is represented in one of the tour things, is that there's this particular word that refers to red that many of you know. It was used today in the title of a book, and it's called The Scarlet Letter, okay? Scarlet, if you go back far enough, scarlet didn't refer to red whatsoever. It referred to the best cloth. So best cloth of any color would be referred to as scarlet. So around 1400 or so, 1400, you get a confluence of things happen. You have a really good fabric that Europeans don't know very well called silk, coming from the Silk Road in Asia. And then you put that together with the best, most expensive dye, which is kermes, and you come up with a really, really nice fabric, silk, dyed with kermes. And about that time, that's when scarlet becomes a term for red. It's actually the term for the most expensive fabric, which is a red fabric at this point. And it becomes a term for red as a result. So kermes is the dominant insect red, the most expensive one in Europe, right up until the time that Spain starts resourcing things from Central and South America, and then cochineal takes over from that. Anyone else? Yes.
I was just gonna say, this is really fascinating and would make a great book.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of good books out there already. Some of them are in the gift shop if you care to. What's the one book I always tell about? Pastoreau book. Pastoreau is a French artist, author, social historian. That's a better way to quantify them. And he's written specific books about different colors, black, white. And he writes a very good one about red, but the other one I'm thinking of is called The Perfect Red. It's about 15, 20 years old, and it's a fantastic book. And it tells a great story of red, including some of the things I just said. Yes.
For people who are interested in it from more of a fashion side,
Mhm.
cloth side, there's a book called The Secret Lives of Color.
Yeah.
That goes into a lot of the history of different color dyes, which is different than the pigments that you use for painting.
Absolutely. So she was just saying a book called The Secret Lives of Color.
Patsy St. Clair is the author of that.
Okay, thank you. Sissy, our dozens are on it. And then a last word on that, and we're going to wrap it up now. But the last word I'll tell you is that the current artist with the temporary artworks, whose name just went out of my head, the two large murals in the other building.
Oh,
Martha Clippinger. Okay, Martha Clippinger is a local artist. I believe she lives in Durham, and she did these two very large, modern-looking murals in the other building. And she's a fascinating artist. But one of the aspects of her art, and I believe some of her weavings are on view in the shop, is she's a longtime weaver. And several years ago, she got a scholarship, and she spent a year in Oaxaca. And Oaxaca is famous for its crafts, particularly for weaving and dyeing. And that's exactly where we got our example of wool dyed with cochineal that's in the exhibition. So when you look around, there's a lot of these things that you can get interested in. And Martha Clippinger is a fantastic artist, and I definitely recommend you look more closely at her work. Okay, thank you very much. Like I said, give me about 10 minutes or so, and I will be over in the exhibition. Thank you.